I tried copying the acoustic guitar sound from two other creators, and it honestly didn't turn out quite the way that I expected. So I borrowed some techniques to try to figure out how to get a better acoustic sound. I set up two different microphones and tried their mixing process. And I learned a few things that I hadn't thought of before, but I also ran into some problems that kept my acoustic from sounding fully finished. So I want to show you what worked, what didn't, and what I'll be changing next time to try to improve the acoustic guitar sound that I get at home. So I started out by trying to find a couple of tutorial videos on YouTube from some other creators so I could see what their recording and mixing process was for acoustic guitars. I found two creators. One was Josh Turner and the other was Jacob Sommerio from English Oak Recording. And I watched both the videos that they had and got a general overview of the process that they used and then tried to recreate a little bit of that on my own. So both Josh and Jacob used a small diaphragm condenser microphone in order to record the guitar. Josh Turner also used a dynamic microphone and blended those together, but I wanted to keep it fairly simple, so I chose to just record with one mic. So I recorded with a small diaphragm condenser microphone, but I made some mistakes here, which I realized later on, and I'll get back to that here in a little bit. So when I did the recording for the small diaphragm condenser microphone, I did one recording where I was about 6 inches away from the 12th fret, and then I did another recording that was about 12 inches away from the 12th fret as well. So here's what the raw recording sounded like from the small diaphragm condenser microphone. So I tried to model each of the creators' mixing chains that they had. They had some things that were common between them, but then there were a few differences in how they either ordered their plugins or the kinds of plugins that they used. So the basic breakdown of the chain that Jacob was using was he was using a tape plugin up front that he was using as a compressor on the acoustic guitar. And then he was going into a channel strip that he was using the EQ to really shape the sound, basically take away some frequencies that he didn't like. And then he was going into a plate reverb, and then he went into a bus compressor, and then he went into another tape plugin. So I'm going to start you out and play again the raw recording by itself, and then I'll add in each plugin and talk through what each of them is doing or what I tried to do with each of the plugins. So here's just the raw recording. This is the small diaphragm condenser microphone, and this is Jacob Sommerio's chain that I'm kind of putting together at the moment. All right, and then he added in the tape plugin up front, and this is just to control the dynamics a little bit. He's using this kind of like compression. So this is adding in the channel strip, and this is really just to deal with the mid-range a little bit to make that a little less prominent. And I took out some of the mids at around somewhere a little bit above 2 or close to 2K. And then also around 7, it looks like, took out a little bit as well. And then I added in an LA2A compressor, and this is not what he had done in his chain, but this is again just controlling some dynamics. And the settings for that were just low cutting around 90, putting about 2 seconds in the reverb, and then cutting down the bass and the treble just to get a little bit better of sound. And the next one was adding in the bus compression. And this is just, again, kind of gluing all that together. And then the final thing was just adding in another tape plugin. And this again was just to try to work on the sound a little bit more. So here's the before with no plugins on. again. So the basic rundown for Josh Turner in his chain that he was using was a vintage like channel strip that he was using for EQ. And then he was going into a compressor to help control the dynamics of the acoustic guitar. And then he went into a plate reverb, and then he went into a tape emulation plugin, and then used the saturation on that to just dial in the sound a little bit more. So for this one, I didn't have all the same plugins that he had. So I substituted for a different channel strip or EQ that I used up front. And then I used a different compressor. And then I had a little bit of a different plate reverb, but I did have the final tape plugin that he had as well. And so this one is the raw recording of just the small diaphragm condenser microphone by itself. And then here's with the EQ turned on. He was using a different EQ, but essentially the same thing, just kind of coming in and making some cuts in the mid-range. I think it cut around 1.6 with this plugin. So that's what this sounds like after that's engaged. All right, and then adding in a compressor to, again, kind of use that compression, just kind of tame the dynamics a little bit. All right, and then after that, adding in a plate reverb. And again, same basic settings, cutting off low cut around 90, about 2 seconds on the actual reverb time, and then bass and treble just cut down a little bit. So here's what that sounds like with that in. And then adding in tape to really just kind of add the character and round off the sound a little bit. So the big key here was just going down to the lowest speed, the oldest tape formula, and then just adding in saturation until it adds stuff in, but not too much to where it starts distorting and sounding terrible. So again, here's the before without any plugins, and then I'll add it in with all the plugins back in. Here's back in. So I definitely learned a ton through this process. I really liked the different vintage EQs, the plate reverb, and using the tape in the mixing process. I hadn't really tried that much with acoustic guitar, so that was cool to try that out and see how those things worked well in the mix and with the acoustic guitar. The few of the mistakes that I made, I think I recorded way too close with the small diaphragm condenser microphone, and you can hear the boominess on that, especially in that first recording. And then when I listen back to the mixes now, I think I mixed it a little bit too bright with all the plugins. So when I go back next time, the things that I'm going to fix are I'm going to make sure that I record with the microphone a little bit further away. So probably somewhere between like 12 and 18 inches away from that 12th fret. And then as I mix everything together, focusing in on making it a little less bright when I do the rest of the plugins together. Well, hopefully you saw a couple things that you can use in your own mixes, and hopefully you don't make the same mistakes that I made in my own mixes this time. Thanks so much for spending time with me and hanging out, and I will see you in the next round.